Hello and welcome to this session on child-inclusive mediation, in which we're going to jointly present some information about child-inclusive mediation and hopefully have sufficient time towards the end to answer questions. We hope there'll be a number of questions that we'll be able to provide some clarification on. And firstly, I think it's best to say, let's introduce ourselves. I'm Adrian Wright. I'm based in Market Harborough in Leicestershire. I'm a child-inclusive mediator, accredited mediator. I'm also a supervisor of mediators and an assessor for the Family Mediation Council. I also provide training in child-inclusive mediation and have found it to be one of the most effective ways forward in child cases.
Hello, my name's Corinna Schiffer. I have 25 years experience in the family justice system. The first 12 years was as a barrister in London, dealing often with children's issues, both domestically and internationally. Then I became a mediator and have been running my own service in Farnham in Surrey for over 10 years. And I have carried on there my interest in the effect of separation on children.
Right, can we have the next slide, please, James? What we're going to do here is just present a little bit of context and background formulated by Lady Hale in 2006, in which she affirmed how important it was for the voice of the child to be heard in family proceedings. We'll give you a few moments to digest what Lady Hale said, and then we'll move on to some further information. So as you can see, Lady Hale was very much an advocate of children being heard in family proceedings, but also more widely. And this links to the UN Convention on Children, in which it states that children have a right to be heard in administrative as well as judicial proceedings. Bearing in mind that mediation could be seen as an administrative proceeding, this is why the Family Mediation Council, with the support of family mediators, believe in the importance of children being seen and heard in mediation. Next slide, please, James. And the next one, please. So the impact of separation and divorce. This is not exhaustive, what we put up here. But this is, imagine two individuals going through separation, or they've been separated for a period of time. And these are some of the emotional and some of the other reactions that can occur in such situations. Generally, many of the things will be seen as negative aspects, although in some situations, naturally, there can be some relief and there can be the degree of euphoria depending on the individual's situation. But for many people who've gone through separation and divorce as adults, they can be impacted considerably. And if we could have the next slide, please. For the child also, they can also be hugely impacted. And again, there may be a number of negative connotations here, but there could be elements of relief. For instance, a child may feel, or children may feel, that the parents seem happier being apart. But for children, there can be also the fear of what if one parent's left from the primary parent, i.e. the one they're perhaps spending most time with, also leaving. They may feel that one parent or perhaps both parents aren't as accessible as before. They may feel a degree of insecurity, and also there's elements of inappropriate parenting, where it's not unusual to hear of the child mothering or fathering a parent or indeed both parents. Some of this again could be contentious. For instance, poor academic performance. It's not necessarily a given when there's separation and divorce. Some children focus their energies into study with supportive peers. So some of these aspects could be challenged. Next slide, please. There are practicalities, of course, on separation and divorce, and there can be a huge amount to sort out, such as immediate finance, long-term finance, residences, who's going to live where, who's got the accounts, particularly if there have been businesses. And what about wider family implications? What about wider family pressures, influences of peers, friends, etc.? What about medical registrations, pensions, family documentation, contents of a property, pets, cars, etc.? So a great deal of practicality also needs sorting out, even some months or indeed a period of time since separation. And the next slide, please. And if we put them all together, you can see that for many people can find themselves stumbling through a degree of chaos, feeling almost overwhelmed, that everything is perhaps a huge mess. And somewhere the child is here amongst all this. And it's therefore not unusual in a number of situations, as the parents are trying to focus on sorting so much out, that the child can somehow get lost to some extent, not through any intention of the parents at all. That's the last thing they would want, but preoccupied with so much going on for them to sort out, plus dealing with their own emotional situation. Children can very easily slip from being an obvious priority in the sense of hearing what the children have to say or what the child has to say. Even very young children start forming views of to what extent they're going to be heard, to what extent their needs are going to be taken into account of. But as can be seen, there can be quite a lot to sort out in these situations. And the next slide, please.
Right. So what is child-inclusive mediation? It normally arises when, as Adrian's been discussing, the parents are separating. They need to discuss their housing, their finances, and how they're going to co-parent the children. There might be one parent who has the children during the week and another parent who sees them at the weekend. Or they might want to share the time 50-50. But sometimes there is a tension between mum and dad about how much time they should each have. Or they might be worried about how the situation is affecting their child. Their daughter or son might be acting out of character, might be more withdrawn, might be in their room a lot, or more frustrated, showing aggressive behavior. So the mediator can then offer to see the child or children on their own. This normally takes place at a neutral venue, the mediator's office, or a room that is hired. And the session often lasts between 40 to 60 minutes. And the practicalities are that the parents have to each agree to this. And there's a special form, the consent form they need to sign. The child has to agree, but also the mediator has to support the idea. And here, the mediator has to be careful not to make things worse for the child. So if the conflict between mum and dad is clearly worrying the child, and there is evidence that maybe the child is suffering mentally from this unhealthy situation, then a mediator might feel that the child is too vulnerable and that we should not go down this route. Next slide. So how does it work in practice? So as I said, they're the consent forms. Then the mediator writes to the child, either by email or a text, or it can be a physical letter. The letter will be age appropriate, so geared to the age of the child. The mediator will introduce themselves, say that mum and dad are keen to hear their point of view, but there's no pressure for them to do this. It's totally up to them. And the mediator will also explain the issue of confidentiality, which is that they will only report back to the parents that information which the child is happy for them to pass on, except for safeguarding issues. So then the letter also mentions where the meeting might take place, on which day and which location. And it lastly invites the child to say whether they're happy to do it or not. Then the next step after that is for there to be a preparation session between the mediator and the parents. It's often done on Zoom, and it lasts normally about an hour. The mediator checks again that this is an appropriate case for them to see the child, because they've got to be clear that there won't be any repercussions for the child if they send messages which are negative about either of the parents. So if that's all right, if the parents are on board and are sensitive, then the mediator will ask about the child's personality, their hobbies, their interests, what they like at school, so that with this information, they can hope to try and put the child at ease at the beginning of the conversation. And then lastly, the mediator will ask the parents what areas they would like them to explore, what concerns they might have, on what issues they want the child's opinion. But here again, the mediator has their own discretion and will tell the parents that if in the conversation with the child, these sort of areas or questions seem natural and the child seems to be open to that kind of conversation, yes, then those questions will be asked. But if it feels uncomfortable at all or pressurizing a child, then the mediator won't ask those questions, because the child is the most important person in this process, not the parents. So then the meeting with the child, the mediator, as I tried to explain, has got complete freedom in what they do. They will try and establish a rapport with the parents, with the child, at the beginning. And again, remind them that it's only what they specifically agree should be passed on to the parents, that information will be done, that will be done. And then most mediators just start off with some general questions like, how are things at school? How are things with your friends? How's your home situation? And at a natural point, they might ask about mum and dad and what's the situation like? And could anything be done to improve things? And they let the child take the lead and see what that leads to. And in my experience, most children are quite forthcoming in their views and are very happy that somebody has come to see them, to hear what they want or how they're doing. And they have clear messages often for the parents. Then after listening to the child, the mediator does have to gently explain that even though mum and dad have asked to hear their opinion, the adults are still going to be the decision makers here. And that we as mediators can't promise that whatever they suggest is actually going to be taken up by the parents. And children seem to accept that. They seem to understand that. I suppose they've had their parents kind of parenting them all their lives. So, but what I do find is that they are grateful that somebody's come to listen to them and an independent person has given them some time. So then we finally come to the feedback session with the parents. This is normally organised as soon as possible after seeing the child, so that the child doesn't have to carry the worry of how the parents are going to react for any length of time. And the mediator will use the actual words that the child has used. And there might be some flip chart papers where a child has drawn a family tree or the house or houses where they live and the people who live there. So the parents can see that. And the mediator will sensitively communicate the messages and of course stress anything that's positive. And then you talk to the parents of where do we go from here and what feels right to you. They might want to discuss this there and then, or they might say, oh, I'd like to think about things and we'll have another session later. And again, you've got lots of flexibility. You can say, well, let's try a particular arrangement for a while, stage one, see how that goes and give it a month or two or longer, and then come and see if that's going well. We move on to stage two. So next slide. Right, the age of the children. So general rule over the age of 10. But if you've got a mature 9-year-old or even a mature 8-year-old, then they could be seen. And if you have a group of siblings and you maybe have a 14-year-old boy, you might speak to them first and have your more detailed discussion with them, and then see a 8-year-old brother and sister for a shorter, simpler session with them. But then they'll feel included. They've seen the mediator as well. So then the question, you might start to think, right, well, what is different about child-inclusive mediation from a CAFCAS report, which is ordered by the court, where the child is also seen by a CAFCAS officer? So a CAFCAS is a statutory body, and it has the responsibility to report the views of children back to the judge. But they've also got a role to check that a child is not suffering from harm or is likely to suffer from harm in any given situation. And CAFCAS officers have got some prescribed questions that they need to explore. They naturally have discretion, depending on the age and the personality of the child and the situation, how they ask these questions, but they need to check everything's all right. So by contrast, a mediator can use their own intuition, whether to ask something or not. Of course, if there's a hint of abuse, the mediator needs to check out what's going on. And if there are concerns of risk of harm, then the mediator needs to start thinking about whether social services need to be involved. But anything below that threshold, remains in the discretion of the mediator. And now back to Adrian again for the next slide.
Thanks, Corinna. Yeah, the costs really will vary considerably. We've got a sum here of an average of £500 to £700 for the full CIM process through mediation. That, I have to say, is probably more towards the top end, although we are aware that some people charge even more than that. You may find that shopping around is by far the best way forward, and really checking out with lots of mediators what the potential costs may be, because there are mediators that may do it from about £80 per hour or even less. So if it comes to what we call paying private fees, such as the 500 to 700, then we'd certainly encourage people to shop around, because we do know that there's a lot of folk that really would be enormously stretched. You know, been through having to pay out so much already, and particularly if it's a split household with no new partners, and so we're talking about single income parenting. You know, these are going to be quite considerable costs. However, there is good news. Now, the good news is for those who are already in receipt of legal aid, and although that seems to be becoming fewer and fewer each year, for those who are in receipt of legal aid for family mediation, mediators who provide that legal aid can apply for a co-mediation rate to be utilised, which should be built into their legal aid contracts, therefore enabling another mediator, a child-inclusive mediator, to come in and provide some assistance. And so it could be potentially that those in receipt of legal aid for family mediation may not have to pay anything further for the child-inclusive element. What the good news, particularly good news, is through the good services of the Family Mediation Council and the Ministry of Justice, there are vouchers available for all couples, all parents who go to family mediation on a children's issue. And therefore, everyone is potentially entitled to £500 voucher, which goes towards the mediation costs. Now, not all mediators are signed up to this voucher scheme, but the majority are in the country. And so that's not a bad starting point. If cost is a real consideration for anyone thinking of child-inclusive mediation, then certainly look for child-inclusive mediators who have signed up to the government voucher scheme. The other thing to do, I mean, I mentioned shopping around. For some people, price isn't necessarily an issue. They're looking for value. They're looking for considerable experience. They're looking for what might be the right fit. And by browsing the websites of family mediators, you should be able to get an idea of in a sense, the mediator's pedigree. Most mediators will have a profile somewhere outlining their experience, etc. And the mediator's experience doesn't necessarily mean because the mediator's been practicing for 20 years or 30 years that they're going to be better than a mediator who's been practicing for 4 or 5 years. But certainly reading around the subject on this, you'll get a feel. You'll get a feel for the sort of mediator. And I think it's worth impressing again at this point that the only mediators that are able to do child-inclusive mediation are those who are accredited by the Family Mediation Council and have also done an additional training in child-inclusive mediation and are therefore accredited to be child-inclusive mediators. If anyone is thinking of using a mediator that hasn't got those credentials to talk with their children, I would say be warned. Don't go down that route, because there can be some pretty odd practice going out there going on out there from mediators who aren't accredited with the Family Mediation Council. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, I should have mentioned, sorry, could we go back? I'm so sorry. Go back to the previous slide. I should have mentioned timescales here. Timescales, this is where children can be seen much, much more swiftly than if a matter was to go to court. To actually put in an application for court and for it to be processed and for a slot to be provided, you can be talking about many months down the road, unless it's an emergency application. Through family mediation, the chance is contact can be made with a mediation service or a mediator. And from that point through to a child being consulted via the parents being in mediation, we could be talking about a matter of 4 to 6 weeks. And if it's of the essence, if time is of the essence, then certainly child-inclusive mediation is a very useful way forward. But as Corinna has correctly pointed out, there is a fairly carefully staged process. And that process is absolutely important to be sure that everything is done in a measured way, in a considered way, and in a manner which is suitable, particularly for the parents and especially for the child or children who may find themselves being involved. And the next slide, please. And those are the details for finding out about a CIM mediator, a child-inclusive mediator, through the Family Mediation Council. It's by far the best way in which to find which mediators are operating in the locality that suits the parents. And if they so wish, anyone can Google family mediators in the given area. For instance, quite often I find with the commitments I have nowadays, I'm frequently encouraging inquirers to myself, where I'm saying, I'm sorry, I'm pretty booked up, but please Google family mediators, Northamptonshire, Leicestershire, and then my understanding is they'll find one. There are at least 15 to 20 family mediators within about a 15-mile, 20-mile radius of where I am. So there are ways and means, either through the Family Mediation Council or doing your own Google search. What I thought I'd just mention to amplify a couple of things here, and it's picking up on something Corinna said earlier, and I'll refer to in a short while when I give a couple of case examples of some cases that we've been involved in. Integrity of the process. It's certainly when I'm delivering training to mediators who want to train as family mediators, I stress the importance of integrity of the process. And that is because, as Corinna pointed out, there are children who may not have a lot to say, or what they have to say, they believe the parents won't be able to implement or really have great regard to what their views are. And there could be understandable reasons for this. And I have heard from mediators over the years saying, you know, it's been so disappointing. It's been so sad. I interviewed a lovely youngster today, and the parents didn't seem to or couldn't take on board what the child's wishes were. And Adrian, I'm not sure I'm really cut out for doing this, because it seems sad that what the child wants, the parents can't implement. My view is, well, what was the child's response to actually having that discussion with you? Oh, well, the child said it was like a big millstone off their shoulders. And I said, well, that's what you need to hold on to. This provides a conduit. The absolute bottom line, it provides a conduit for a child to express themselves. And for many children, they haven't got a safe space or a place they can go to where they can just offload. And for me, the integrity of the process is important. If a child expresses views, asks the mediator to make a particular note of what it is they want their parents to hear, and makes it clear to the mediator that those other aspects of their discussion they don't want the mediator to report to the parents, then if the child hears from each parent what the parent heard from the mediator, and that matches with that child's own sense of confidentiality, then the mediator's upheld the process with integrity. And the child will feel, I could be honest with that mediator, and they honoured that honesty. And for me, is a fundamentally important thing. And so in many situations, it may be that the parents can't implement what it is the child wishes, but the child still nevertheless feels they've had an opportunity to express themselves. The other thing I thought it's maybe worth amplifying, and again, it was covered by Corinna, but it is very much this aspect that both parents have got to be keen on having child-inclusive mediation. If one parent is reluctant, or feels they're being coerced, or they feel they're being manipulated into a situation, and it doesn't sit comfortably with them, then we would say to a mediator, don't press it, don't push, because both parents have got to trust the mediator, trust the process, and actually believe that it is a useful forum for their child.
On that, Adrian, I don't know, what springs to mind for me there is where a parent says, oh, the child's going to be coached. Yeah. And that can come up.
Absolutely right. It's where there's that element of mistrust. Now, this is a tricky one for child-inclusive mediation, because invariably, well, it could be that a number of children are spending equal time with each parent, i.e. 3.5 days in one property, 3.5 in the other, or and so on. But it's not unusual for one child to have, in a sense, a primary residence, primary carer, as in they are spending possibly up to 90% of their time with one parent, and they only see the other parent perhaps at weekends, or certainly far less. Now, it could be that if the child-inclusive mediation is set up online, and particularly online, then the chance is that child might well be seen online in that primary carer's residence. And that might inhibit the youngster from being able to express themselves freely. And it's just a thought. And it's whether should there be a neutral venue, if it's going to be online, somewhere neutral for that to happen. And certainly we would never advocate for a child or children to be seen online in their bedrooms. Although some people might say, well, that's the child's safe space. That's their domain. That's where they're at ease at being in. For us, it's seen as a little bit intrusive, perhaps a little bit too. It doesn't seem right. And it's really about protecting, doing our own safeguarding in many ways, being sure that children are protected in every which way. From experience, maybe because I'm older in years, from experience, I found that in person is the best means, quite often for mediation, let alone child-inclusive mediation, because in person, you're dealing with all the senses, and you can see the whole person. You can read the micro body language. And it's much easier to develop a rapport with a child in person. The sort of venue, offices work as well as anywhere else. Children are often very inquisitive, and I've done a few in, more than a few, in the boardrooms of legal firms. And you'd find that the children are absolutely fascinated with the work of lawyers and what's going on. But for other mediators, they may find it more suitable to do such meetings in perhaps what are seen as more child-friendly environments, although legal firms can be very child-friendly. But those are just a few points that I thought it's worth perhaps amplifying. Conscious of time, and I thought I'd just give a couple of case examples, a few case examples, to bring this, a bit more to life. And that is the very first one I ever did, going back some years ago, was of a 13-year-old lad in West London. And it really stands out because he had witnessed, his parents had been separated for about 10 years. Sorry, less than 10 years, 8 years. He was 5 years old when he witnessed his father throw his mother down the staircase. And the parents had been separated for a long period of time, as outlined. And the father had an arrangement to see the son under a form of supervision initially. Not a formal supervision, but with another relative. And the father tended to let the son down. He was full of wanting to see the son and stand by him and see him regularly, but he tended to let the son down a little bit and not always show up. But by the time I came on the scene, the father had come to a situation where he was much more settled in his life, and he wanted to help. Well, he wanted to see his son on a regular basis. The mother had some concerns, great concerns. And when I saw the young lad, as I say, he was 13, and he explained to me that he'd seen what had happened when he was a 5-year-old. He said, those images can never be erased. He said, Adrian, I saw my mother with her broken bones and the paramedics and the ambulance. And he says, I will never forget what happened. He said, but there are some important things I need. I actually need my father to help guide me to be the man I intend to become. Not a violent man, that's not what he's talking about. He said, I need my father. I need his guidance ultimately. He said, at the moment I go to a mosque with an uncle, but I'd love to go one day to the mosque where my father goes. And he said, and as for my mother, she's been wonderful, how she's looked after me. He said, but I would like her to understand that I don't wish her to remind me on a daily basis what my father was like. And it was quite incredible when I gave the feedback to the parents. The father seemed much more reformed character from what I gathered, and was in a new relationship and settled, as was the mother. But the mother was really distressed to hear that she was reinforcing in the boy's mind what he'd experienced. And it turned out to be one of those cases where some 6 months after the child-inclusive mediation, the mediator let me know that the young lad was now going to the same mosque as his father. And that was quite incredible. It was one of those cases that the mediator himself felt important to follow through on. Another one that stands out was that of an 11-year-old girl. And that was in the Shropshire area. And she was so effusive. She spoke for over an hour. She had so much to say. And she was so complimentary about both her parents. Through the eyes of an 11-year-old, she saw their struggles between them as they were separating. And it was almost like she was trying to mother both mum and dad along the way. And she had so much to talk about, her own experiences. And she said that what she wanted was a couple of weeks with mum and a couple of weeks with dad. But then she said, but I know that can't happen, because everyone tells me that would never happen. And even the courts might not let that happen. And she was just quite amazing. But she said that's what she'd like, and that's what she'd like me to put back to the parents. And basically what I managed to get out from her, I said, well, tell me a bit more, what's behind this? And what it was, she wanted to, it was her way of demonstrating she loved them both equally, and felt that by being with them each for 2 weeks would amplify that, or would make that clear. And she, in common with every other child I've seen over 72 children, have all asked me to put on a flip chart exactly what it is they want their parents to say. And they've all said, don't edit it. They don't want me to edit it. They want it in their words. And I always give them plenty of time to consider what they've put down. This gives them a chance to delete things, change things. And then I can do a definitive flip chart, which is what they want to go back to the parents. But it's always fascinated me, because when I give feedback to the parents verbally, I always have a lump in my throat. And the parents know it's their child's words, which I find enormously important. And I'll come to a third situation, a third case, which is completely different to the previous two. And that is of a young lad who was 14, I believe. And his parents were absolute intellectuals, there's no doubt about it. Incredibly bright, lovely people, lovely individuals. As individuals, they were great. Together, they were still at war. There's no doubt about it. And the mediator who asked me to do the child-inclusive mediation said that the parents were still struggling many, many, many months after their separation. And the one son that they wanted me to see had acknowledged was keen to come and meet with me, or seemed to be keen. And when I saw him, he made it clear that he didn't really have much to say. And I started asking a number of questions, and he said, Adrian, no, got nothing to say. I said, is there anything at all you'd like your parents to hear? Because they've arranged this, and my understanding is you came here willingly, you wanted to be here. And he says, well, I love them both. He says, they don't, they're always arguing with each other. He says, I love them both, but I haven't got anything to say. Okay. Would you like me to feed that back to them, that you love them both? Yeah. And is that it? Is there anything else? He says, yeah, there is actually one thing. And excuse me what I'm going to say now, please, but these are the words. His words exactly. It's your shit, you sort it out. And I said, seriously, you want me to say that? He said, you've asked me what I want them to hear. Tell them I love them, and it's their shit, they sort it out. And so I put it up on the flip chart. And I think it's fair to say that the parents weren't best pleased for what they were paying. That's the feedback they had. But in fairness, I did hear from the mediator subsequently that they went on to resolve matters. So perhaps the young lad's words had some impact. And I think that's enough for me.
Wise words from your last child.
Yeah. Massive impact. So questions, I guess, if
yeah, James, are there any questions?
There are. Thank you you, Adrian and Corinna, so very much for that really interesting and heartfelt talk. It was really, really fantastic. Thank you. There have been some questions. The first one is just regarding the webinar, which will be made available to those who want to rewatch this and the recording on the FMC's website and the slides as well. There have been 3 questions that have come in, so I'll just read them out to you now. The first question is from a current university student who's just finished their family law module and asks, how would you recommend deepening their understanding of mediation in the general family laws in principle, because they're interested in going into family law? So quite a general question for you both. But how would you recommend they best understand their deepening knowledge of mediation?
Well, if I may start, I have been a judge on a national university mediation competition. So not every university sends representatives to this competition. But if he or she is keen, and there's a few of them, they could maybe ask their tutor if they could take part. So what happens there, it's once a year. It's been organized in the past by someone who is a professor at Canterbury University. I escape his name. And so what happens there is they're given a script, and they're given that on the day with a partner, and then the other side are also given a script. So you have two teams of 2 people who are going to be the clients, and then you have another team of 2 people who are going to be the mediators, and then you have a panel of 3 judges. So you have the students acting the role of the clients, then you've got the mediators doing their interventions, trying to get to some kind of common ground, and then you get feedback from your judges as to how well you did in that and what tips you might be able to use. So that's one thing. Adrian, have you got any other ideas about how to get into learn more about mediation?
Gosh, I think you've come up with an absolute gem there. If it's family specifically, I'm sorry, I'm a bit limited here. All I can think of things like the courses, the foundation training.
Yeah,
but that might well be not what the individual's looking for. No, I'm at a bit of a loss. I'll be honest.
I mean, I would also add, if you don't mind, encourage them to join as many of these family mediation week sessions as possible. There is an awful lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Available. No, not at all. Gosh, there are so many sessions available this week, and we're only halfway through. So there's so much to engage with and learn from. And we're very lucky to be in the presence of really, interesting people who really know their topics. So asking questions and engaging in the way you have, I think, is a great first step. I'll also add that whilst it says Helen Anthony on my name, I'm not Helen. I'm James from Our Family Wizard on the committee for this week. And we, like many other organisations, offer work experience to university students where they can potentially sit in mediations or engage with mediators. So feel free to reach out to, I think, local organisations to see if they offer work experience in that capacity and observe where you can, where suitable, of course.
And just to kind of just add to that is, I mean, you're just doing your degree, fine. So then you've got to, go down the route of either solicitor or barrister, and then training contract or pupillage. You've got quite a lot ahead of you. But I was at a reception held by the Family Mediation Council recently, and I had a very nice chat with a young lady who, I don't know, late 20s probably, who is a qualified solicitor who's just become an accredited family mediator, and who's going to do that alongside her general solicitor work. So you can easily get into it when you're a bit younger. You don't have to be old like Adrian and I with grey hair. You can get into it from a younger person's, and might have a fresh approach to things and be really good for clients. So That's what I would say.
Lovely.
Thank you both, really helpful. Someone's commented saying, not a question, just a huge thank you to Adrian and Corinna on amazing briefing and child-inclusive mediation. Knowledge, passion and expertise and empathy flowed through the whole presentation. So I just wanted to share that with you before we had to leave. We've still got 10 minutes and there's questions coming through. Thank you for your questions. Next question. How would you deal with a situation when a child reveals that they want no future contact with one parent, but that parent does not believe the child and instead blames the other parent of alienation? Obviously, a phrase and topic that is, to some extent controversial. And they've asked, how harmful would this be when the rejected parent is narcissistic and covertly abusive and maybe using mediation to continue abuse? And before I let you both answer that, I hosted a session yesterday on mediating with a narcissist. That recording is available on the FMC website, so I encourage you to watch that. On there. There's been another question, is it possible to mediate with a narcissist? Again, I encourage you to look at that recording. But coming back to the initial question, Adrian, Corinna, any thoughts?
I guess my initial thought would be much of this should be picked up in an initial series of assessment meetings by the mediator well before child-inclusive mediation is considered. So in a sense, I'd like to think that a minimum of an hour's meeting, an assessment meeting with a mediator, each party having or each client having a minimum of an hour with each, with the mediator. A mediator might establish to what extent there are concerns. And the chance is with concerns like that, if they were raised at an initial assessment meeting, it's hard to imagine that child-inclusive mediation may go ahead at a later stage. However, if matters aren't picked up initially, if perhaps there hasn't been a thorough enough assessment, or indeed if a client or clients present in a certain way, but perhaps present differently further into the process of mediation itself, and something like that did come out in a child-inclusive mediation situation, all the child-inclusive mediator can do is maintain the integrity of the process, meaning feeding back what it is the child wants to be fed back, and really not taking a view at all. But I think this goes to show that mediation isn't suitable in every case, for sure. And there is always a risk. It's something we're always very careful about, I know Corinna and myself, is to be sure that the people getting involved have done their sort of full pros and cons, costs, benefits, and what could be the downside. Because if someone is what I would call a persistent perpetrator, I'm uncomfortable with the terms narcissist. Defining what a narcissist exactly is difficult enough. And quite often, in my experience, when someone alleges another person is a narcissist or makes that allegation against another person, it can sometimes be that other person. Sometimes people project stuff onto others. I think that's probably the best way to put it. I think it goes to show that if someone happens to be a bit of a perpetrator, whatever their label, then yes, some people can use mediation when it's probably not the right medium to be used. Sorry, Corinna, anything to add on that?
I think I've had cases. These have not been in the area of child-inclusive mediation, but just general financial mediation, where I've been sitting there and there's something not quite right. And the hairs on the back of my back are starting to do their own thing. And then what you do as a mediator, you normally then separate the parties and you speak to the person who you think might be being manipulated or where there might be some abuse going on. And I've had this happen a number of times. And yes, the parent will say, "You're absolutely right. I'm terrified of him. I'm just saying what he told me to say." And I'm saying that it could be the other way round. It could be she is manipulating me. And we are trained as mediators. We do regular training in domestic abuse, but also we just learn the antennae of where something's not quite right. And then as soon as you realized that that's going on, then you call an end to the mediation. That's it, end of. And you don't give a particular reason. You get them both back together. You say, something's happened and you can't mediate any longer. You say, when you've been talking to the victim separately, you say, you'll have to go and see a solicitor now. And you need the protection of that. This isn't right. You know, you're going to be mediation. I can't take over that responsibility of trying to make sure you're not, you know, what's going on behind the scenes. So it's called to an end. So that's the general approach to things. And yeah, it would apply as well in child inclusive. As soon as you think, I don't think this is right for the child, this is going to make things worse, or these parents are just unreasonable, there's nothing good going to come out of this, you call an end. You say, no, can't do it. Yeah, so that's my view. Any other questions?
There are, and we've only got 4 minutes left, so I'm going to ask you one of the shorter questions, I suppose. But before I ask that question, Corinna and Adrian, if people have more questions for you, is there places they can reach out to you and find answers to these questions, or where would you best suggest they go and, you know, further research to help them with these questions we haven't had time to answer today? They
can write to me. I'm sure Adrian feels the same. We've given, I think, our email addresses on the first slide. I'm Corinna Schiffer at Farnham Mediation. Adrian Wright, what's your Aspire?
If you wish my email, the email is Adrian Wright 55. So that's Adrian Wright, all joined up, and then 55 numerically at gmail.com.
Brilliant. Thank you both. With the 2 minutes we've got left, I'm going to ask this question. Someone's asked, is there an age restriction on a child taking part in child mediation?
I would, for me, I would say it's really 10 years old. If a child's under 10, I would be concerned. However, we do, well, Corinna, come in on this.
Well, yeah, they vary so much, children, don't they? So I have seen younger children and they've been incredibly mature, more mature than the normal 10-year-old. But you probably won't go much below 8 at the most. Yeah, you're not going to see a 3-year-old. You're not going to see a 6-year-old. A Kafkas officer will see the younger children, of course, and they'll, you know, they've been trained with that. But we normally see, yeah, children a little bit older. And of course, we see them to 18, 20. It doesn't matter what age they are. You know, things don't go away when they become adults. So yeah, that's my answer.
Thank you. One of the questions is about speaking to your organisation, so hopefully the contact details you've provided will be suitable there. We've got 2 minutes, so we're going to try and squeeze one more in. Do you advise children that they can access services like Childline to help them empower themselves with how they feel?
No, not at the moment. I think I've not done that. I think what I've had is situations where things are so extreme and it's become clear to me that this child is too vulnerable, so I haven't seen the child in the first place. But if there are things, I haven't had one where that child has asked me about Childline, but I've had situations where we've said, like, would it be useful to speak to a counsellor or to have some family therapy? Do you think you'd like to do that? Do you speak to people at school? That sort of thing. and then they've come up with ideas and I feed that back to the parents. How about you, Adrian?
Yeah, I check out with children who else they have tried speaking with, or other people. We try and identify if there's anyone else. I have in mind a number of organisations, if there's need, and I have sometimes shared some organisations with the child, and also made sure the parents are aware of the same. And generally, however, it's not really cropped up a great deal. Children wanting or be feeling there is a need, certainly to mention places like Childline. It never seems to have cropped up.
Great. Well, thank you both again ever so much for your time today. There's lots of messages coming through thanking you for such an excellent talk, and I fully agree. A reminder for everyone watching that this will be recorded and available on the FMC's website, and to encourage you to check out the rest of the sessions that are happening this week. There are some really, really interesting talks going on. Apologies to those questions that we didn't get time to get to today, but hopefully Adrian and Corinna will be able to answer them over email. So we'll finish up there. Thank you again, Adrian and Corinna, and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Well, can I thank everyone that's participated as well, and also yourself, James. You've been really excellent helping us here.
A pleasure
Thank
to
you
help.
so much, James, and thanks everybody for listening.
Have a lovely day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.